It's long, and we're fixing it. So the motor cover on this thing is kind of cool, and we'll probably reuse it. But what we're actually doing is taking this HPG, whatever the heck it's called, something or the other, I don't even know what it's called anymore. And we took the planetary gearbox out, okay? So this is the drivetrain that was in it on the first part of the gear reduction system. There's, in the center here, somewhere right around here, there's another gigantic transfer, two-speed transfer case kind of thing with a drive shafts that go out to the front and back. But the 550 can motor that it comes with drives this open face planetary gearbox, which is about a 6 1/4 or 6.3 to 1 ratio. That's what I figured out on the math. It wasn't much math. I drew a line and spun the motor. So that thing was housed in this, which was housed with this on the end, and then this whole thing was bolted onto it like that, actually like this. So it was kind of like this giant stack of parts, like that. It's good. I mean, it actually works, except that the truck is way too fast. So it's big. It weighs probably 20 pounds. Did we actually weigh this? How much does it weigh? 20 pounds? I'm making a guess.
Yeah, it's chunky.
This is friggin' heavy. And so basically I'm taking this out, and we're going to put in a GCM LRT transmission combo, which will drop the rate, no transfer case. I just have the tail shaft sticking out. So there's a half shaft already that goes from the transmission to the transfer case that was already in the vehicle. Can't see it, but it's way in there. So what I'm going to do is take this cross member out and fix it so that I can drop the transmission down into it. And then the motor is going to sit up here on the original motor cradle. And they were inline before, straight in line, because what happened was on the planetary box, you can see it here, like the motor and the output shaft are exactly in line. So on our LRT2 transmission combo, they're not in line. It's below the center line of the motor here. So by about maybe 20 millimeters or something. I'd have to do the math. So the goal is to put the whole drivetrain back in, but then we'll have a 14.3 to 1 ratio instead of a 6.3 ratio, and that will slow the truck right down. And it already has a 2-speed in it. So with the 2-speed, we can still keep the wheel speed if we want. I'm going to increase the power by a considerable amount by using this, I think it's a 10-shock 906. Yep. It's 1750 kV, brushless. There's no sensor. You don't need it. It's a 6-pole motor with 9 slots. And so you actually have like 56 hits per rotation. They're very, very smooth. I love these. I've used them in a bunch of different KVs now. And we're going to replace this whole with that and an LRT2. So that's the plan. So the combo looks like this. Brushless, tranny, output shaft, way to go. I put the original cast aluminum or whatever metal cradle on it, and the cap for the motor is back on. So in order to lift that up, we put 23, I don't know, how much spacer millimeters did we use?
Yeah, 23.
Is it 23? Looks like 23. And so we're lifting the motor cradle off the frame rail. It sits like this. And then the motor's up. It's still frame mounted, so that's not going to move. And then we're going to make a new cradle to go here where the tail shaft kind of area is. So that ought to be nice and solid. Look how awesome this thing is. Amazing. Anyways, now that's in. So we have the spacers underneath here. That's going to be hard to see. It's right there on both sides. Lifted it up 23 millimeters. And then we just put the clamp back on. The clamp was like a 0.5 millimeter loose on the motor can, so I just shaved down the post here. The way that this is made is the post actually sits higher than the base of this piece of casting, so I just shaved off the post 0.5 millimeter on each side. And then when I screwed the motor clamp on, it's super tight. And then in the back here, we designed this new mount that'll go over top of the transmission into the factory 2 holes here. And that right there will just bolt right in. And then I replaced the original drive shaft with a longer one. I used a middle length Junfac on here, right there. And that spans the distance between the center transfer case here and the output of the transmission. So, perfect. Now you're thinking that's sticking out pretty far, but there's actually 3 bearings on that shaft already in the GCM transmission. So I just didn't put the T-case on it. And then boom. So that'll just hold that down. And then my drivetrain is in. As far as the scale stuff goes on the top, here's how this works out. So this is the whole motor section thing. And this thing sits basically right where it was. This is the intake system and the entire exhaust system here. It screws in here. It has a little tiny post that it sits in at the bottom here. Let me fit that in. And then it stays in place better. So basically, because I lifted the motor can, I just took off the motor. So this piece here used to sit right here in the top of the engine. So I took the engine apart and I took that turbo post whatever plastic thing that was there and I just left it there on top of the engine and I took off the rest of the block. So that doesn't really matter because the doghouse will cover all that. This thing fits on here like this. Obviously the wires are in the way to keeping that flat, but you get the idea. Tuck that in. Here, I'll just move the wires. See if I can get those out of the way. And then the doghouse covers that over like that. So basically it's back to normal now. And you can just barely see the transmission in there. So perfect. Looks amazing. When you look in there, you actually see an aluminum transmission now instead of this mess of plastic and stuff, which looked cool, but it wasn't the right thing. Now, as far as electronics go, the receiver is on this side, over here. It's in the box on that side. And then the receiver sends the signal over to this side. This thing has a 15 amp back on it. Can you believe that? That's got a 15 amp back. That is unbelievable. So basically what happens is all of the signal wires from the receiver come in on this special wiring harness right here, on this 5-strand wiring harness. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 channels, a power and a ground. That's 3 channels and a power and a ground. Yep, that's how that works out. And then this thing puts out power to 2 steering servos, 2 channel 2s, and 2 channel 3s. So that's how that works. So basically what you do is the ESC was also in there. So right beside it was a speed control, and it just runs off of everything that you would normally use. It's got a Deans, so there's a regular Deans for the speed controller. It's got a regular motor output for the speed controller, and then it's got a switch for the speed controller and a regular, receiver plug for the speed controller. That's it. This thing looks exactly like the kind of thing you would see on Axial SCX10, something like that, but it's actually not. It's quite a bit bigger than what you would see on an SCX10. It's a wider and longer speed control than that one. It might be a little less tall than the SCX10 or the Red Cat one or something, but it's definitely longer and wider. And what they did here with this piece of heat shrink is they took out the red wire from the plug. I don't know if you can see it there. I'll try to put it in the light. You can see there's the outside wire in the plug and the inside wire in the plug, and the middle one is missing. You can see that in the video, I hope. So if you take out the red wire, which is what they did, then you're using the power provided by this whole thing to power all the servos. So this thing is like beef, man. Like, this is a 15 amp BEC. That is amazing. And it provides all of the power to all of the servos. It needs that because it has 2 giant servos for the front wheels plus a shifter. So that's a good thing. Now, this is all pre-wired with Dean's stacking for Dean's. So basically, how easy is this, right? This is going to go to the back for the battery. I'll probably change it to XT60 or put an adapter on it because that's what I'm going to use. And this thing is rated for up to 3-cell LiPo already. So I don't know if you can read that in the video, but it says the input is from 6 volts to 12.6 on a 2 and 3S LiPo. So the BEC is already set up for 3S. I will probably stick a 3S battery in it because in my case that makes the most sense. I have a ton of 3S batteries, and that's basically all I use. So if I put a big 3S in the back here in the battery tray, I should be able to get huge runtime on it. And so that's the electronic setup, and I'm going to put the little tiny Hobby Wing brushless in here with this huge BEC, and hopefully that'll all fit. Obviously we need to get that bracket on. This is the bracket that we designed here, and it's just basically a horseshoe to go over the transmission, and then it bolts through the factory bracket holes. So pretty much just sit that thing on top like that and get it in position, and then basically there we go. That's it. Pretty simple, eh? And all that does is clamp it into the spot where there used to be the transmission housing clamp. This whole thing used to actually go in there. I think it went like this actually. So that was the big tail shaft bearing for that reduction box. And so by putting those 2 mount holes, it kind of went way under the chassis there. So we just used the same mount hole. So our transmission is now just sitting in here right underneath that with a new bracket on top, and then that's it. Now we looked at electronics placement, and it turns out that the wires for the brushless motor and the ones coming from the ESC way over here are not going to meet. There's going to be a gap about this long. So instead of changing all that, I've decided to move the ESC up here. Now, basically where that's going to fit, let me put this back together here so you can see how it fits, at least in part. So that piece goes essentially there. There's some screws missing, but you get the idea. And then the doghouse covers over this whole thing right up to here. And so I've decided to put the speed control right there. It's going to sit in that empty hole right on top of the transmission. And there's a fan on the speed control that I'm going to mount outwards this direction. So when you look into the doghouse from this side, all you see is the fan cover. You don't really see much of that. And you won't see any wiring or anything because I can tuck that in all behind. And in the front of the doghouse here, there's this great big recess in the interior for the vent fan, for the vent for the fan. So basically on the original truck, the full-size version, the draw air would come from here and down into the engine compartment like this for the most part, because on the bottom it would be all skid plates and smooth, right? So this thing here will have, it has a grill already on the doghouse right here, so you can't really see in there. And from this side, you'll see just the ESC fan, and that's it. And the wiring will all be tucked in. So I think I can't use it in here. There's just simply not enough room. This thing is amazing, but it's also really, really tight. And part of the problem with it, where it is it's too far away from the motor. So that's the plan. anyway, we're getting there. So thanks for watching, and we're going to get the rest of this stuff buttoned up here in the next video, so stay tuned for part 2.